It started with a voicemail. The kind of message that makes the hairs on the back of your neck stand on end before you've even hit play. Evan, it's Ryan. Look, this isn't something I'd normally ask, but I need your help. Emma's missing. The cops won't do anything. Please, call me back. Ryan Hughes. I hadn't heard that name in years. We weren't close, but we'd overlapped during college. Friends of friends, occasionally meeting at the same parties or group projects. He was quiet, a little awkward, but always decent. The kind of guy who'd apologize for taking the last slice of pizza, even if nobody else wanted it. But this wasn't the kind of message you leave for a casual acquaintance. Something had to be seriously wrong. I called him back. We met at a dingy diner just off the interstate, the kind of place where the coffee tastes like ash and the fluorescent lights hum loud enough to set your teeth on edge. Ryan looked terrible. His clothes hung loose on his wiry frame, and his eyes were rimmed with dark circles. He flinched every time the door opened, his gaze darting toward the sound like he was expecting someone to burst in. "Thanks for coming," he said as I slid into the booth across from him. His voice was hoarse, like he hadn't used it much or had been screaming into the void. "What's going on?" I asked. "You said Emma's missing?" Ryan nodded, his fingers drumming against the edge of the table. "It's been 3 months. She went to this retreat, out in the woods, a self-help thing. I thought it was harmless at first. She'd been struggling, anxiety, depression, you know. She said it was supposed to help her find clarity. But after the first week, her messages got weird." "Weird how?" He pulled out his phone and opened a folder of saved messages. The first few were benign. Emma smiling into the camera, talking about how peaceful the place was, how much better she felt being unplugged from the world. But then the tone shifted. The last few clips were darker. Emma whispering into her phone, her eyes darting off screen. "They're watching us all the time," she said in one clip. "Dr. Rayner says it's for our own good, but it feels wrong. I don't know if I can trust anyone here." In another, she was crying. "I want to come home, but they won't let me leave. Ryan, if you get this, please." The clip ended abruptly. My stomach churned. What the hell is this place? Ryan sighed and rubbed his temples. "It's called the Path of Clarity, run by some guy named Dr. Marcus Rayner. He's a psychologist, or claims to be. A few weeks after Emma went missing, I drove out there to look for her. The staff said she'd left on her own, but they couldn't, or wouldn't, tell me where she went. The cops didn't take me seriously. They said she was an adult, free to come and go as she pleased." "And you don't believe them?" "Not for a second." He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "She left her car, her ID, her phone. That's not like her, Evan. And then there's this." He slid a USB drive across the table. "What's on it?" I asked, picking it up. More video. Stuff she recorded and uploaded to the cloud before she disappeared. I managed to get her login info from her laptop. I hesitated. The last thing I needed was to get dragged into someone else's mess. Freelancing was hard enough without chasing ghosts. But Ryan's desperation was palpable. He needed someone to believe him, someone to look past the official narrative and dig deeper. And I had a knack for digging. "I'll take a look," I said, pocketing the drive. But no promises. Later that night, I sat in my dimly lit apartment, the glow of my laptop screen the only light in the room. I plugged in the USB drive and opened the files. The videos were grainy, taken from Emma's phone, but they painted a chilling picture. People sitting cross-legged in a circle, their eyes closed, chanting something unintelligible. Dr. Rayner stood in the center, his voice calm but commanding. "To find clarity, you must first confront the lies you tell yourself. You must strip away the ego, the facade, the illusion of control." In another clip, participants were blindfolded, their hands bound with silk scarves as they were led into the forest. Emma's breathing was ragged, the camera shaking as she filmed from behind a tree. "They say it's a trust exercise," she whispered, "but it feels more like a test." The final video was the most disturbing. Emma was filming herself, her face illuminated by the glow of her phone. "I think they know I've been recording," she said, her voice trembling. "Dr. Rayner keeps asking me questions about my loyalty. I don't know what to do. If you find this, Ryan, don't trust anyone." The screen went black. I couldn't sleep that night. Emma's face, her voice, haunted me. I'd seen enough to know this wasn't just another story. It was a trapdoor into something dark and dangerous. By morning, I'd made up my mind. I called Ryan. "I'll do it," I said. "I'll go to the retreat and find out what's really going on." There was a pause, and then his voice came through, heavy with relief. "Thank you, Evan. Just be careful. They're not what they seem." And so, with a bag packed and a burner phone in hand, I set out to uncover the truth about the Path of Clarity. Whatever secrets it held, I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't walking away until I found Emma, or what was left of her. The drive to the Path of Clarity retreat felt endless. The closer I got, the more the roads narrowed, the trees thickening into an oppressive canopy that blocked out most of the sunlight. By the time my GPS chirped, "You've arrived," I felt like I'd crossed into another world, one where even time seemed to move differently. The retreat itself was tucked deep in the forest, a cluster of rustic cabins circling a larger lodge. The air smelled of pine and damp earth. The only sounds the occasional chirp of a bird or the rustle of wind through the trees. It was serene, almost disarmingly so. A tall man in his 50s greeted me as I stepped out of the car. He was lean, with sharp cheekbones and salt and pepper hair swept back like a silver fox on a magazine cover. "Dr. Marcus Rayner." "You must be Evan," he said, his voice warm and smooth, like honey drizzled over hot tea. His handshake was firm, his eyes locking onto mine with an intensity that made me want to look away. "Welcome. I'm thrilled you've chosen to embark on this journey with us." "I'm excited to be here," I lied, forcing a smile. I've been feeling stuck, and this seemed like the right place to figure things out. Rayner studied me for a beat too long before nodding. "Good. The first step is admitting you need help. We'll take it from here." The participants were a diverse mix. Corporate burnouts, people in the midst of messy divorces, a few who seemed to be running from something unspoken. Each person wore a similar expression, a fragile hope, mingled with unease. They clung to Rayner's every word during the opening session in the lodge. "Welcome, everyone," Rayner began, pacing the room with the confidence of a seasoned performer. "You've come here seeking clarity, seeking freedom. But the truth is, freedom requires sacrifice. To free yourselves, you must shed the lies you tell yourselves. Your ego, your delusions of control." His gaze swept over the group, pausing briefly on me before moving on. "You will feel uncomfortable. You will doubt yourselves, and you will doubt me. That's good. Doubt is the first step toward truth." The room was silent, save for the occasional creak of someone shifting in their chair. I scribbled notes in the small journal I'd brought, feigning earnestness while documenting everything. After the session, we were divided into smaller groups for trust-building exercises. My group was tasked with a silent meditation circle. We were to stare into each other's eyes without speaking, an exercise Rayner claimed would dissolve the walls between us. It was excruciating. Most participants lasted only a few minutes before averting their gaze, their discomfort palpable. But I stayed locked in, observing, cataloging. If Rayner was trying to break us down, this was only the beginning. That night, after a Spartan dinner of vegetable soup and whole grain bread, I returned to my assigned cabin. It was small and Spartan, with a single bed, a wooden desk, and no locks on the door. I sat by the window, writing notes by the dim light of a lamp when there was a soft knock. It was a woman from my group, Lila. She looked to be in her early 30s, with curly brown hair and an air of quiet nervousness. "Do you mind if I sit?" she asked, glancing over her shoulder as if afraid of being seen. "Of course." I gestured to the edge of the bed, and she perched there, twisting her hands in her lap. "Why are you really here?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Caught off guard, I defaulted to my cover story. "I've been struggling, burned out, lost. Just trying to figure out what's next." She snorted softly. "That's what they all say." Her eyes met mine, sharp and searching. "You don't seem like the type to fall for this." "What about you?" I asked, deflecting. "Why are you here?" She hesitated, her gaze dropping to her hands. "My brother came here last year. Same retreat, same promises. When he came home, he wasn't the same. He was distant, paranoid. He kept saying he couldn't talk about what happened here. And then one day, he disappeared. No, nothing. I need to know what they did to him. The air between us grew heavy. Why are you telling me this? I asked. Because you're not like the others, she said. And I think you can help me. The next few days were a blur of increasingly invasive exercises. There were confessional circles, where participants were encouraged to share their deepest, darkest secrets, their voices breaking under Rayner's unrelenting gaze. There were physical endurance challenges meant to push past the limits of the ego, leaving people trembling and broken. I kept my head down, playing the role of the earnest seeker, but the atmosphere was suffocating. Rayner had an uncanny ability to isolate people, exploiting their vulnerabilities and turning their fears against them. At night, Lila and I would meet in secret, sharing what little we'd managed to uncover. She told me she'd overheard staff talking about special sessions for certain participants, sessions that weren't listed on the schedule. I shared what I'd noticed, how Rayner seemed to focus his attention on those who were most fragile, most malleable. We were piecing together a puzzle, but the edges were jagged and the image incomplete. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, I spotted Rayner leading a small group of participants into the woods. They were blindfolded, their hands bound with silk scarves. My pulse quickened as I remembered Emma's video. I slipped out of the cabin, careful to stay in the shadows, and followed at a distance. They stopped in a clearing, where a circle of stones surrounded a smoldering fire pit. Rayner removed the participants' blindfolds, his voice carrying through the still night air. To find clarity, he said, you must first embrace the darkness. I crouched behind a tree, my heart pounding. Whatever was happening here, it wasn't self-help. It was something far darker. As the flames cast eerie shadows across the trees, I knew one thing for certain. I couldn't turn back now. The retreat's library was surprisingly well equipped, with rows of bookshelves lining the walls and a single desktop computer tucked away in the corner. Most of the books were self-help titles and spiritual guides, the kind of fluffy material that catered to the retreat's pseudo-therapeutic branding. But it wasn't the books I was interested in. After days of watching Dr. Rayner's unsettling methods, I knew the answers wouldn't be found in printed words or carefully rehearsed speeches. The truth, if it existed, would be buried in something harder to erase. Something digital. Late one night, when most of the participants were asleep or too drained to move, I slipped into the library. The computer's screen glowed faintly in the darkness. It was password protected, of course, but I'd noticed earlier that day how careless one of the staff members was when logging in. A few tries later, Clarity 2022, and I was in. The desktop was sparse, with only a few icons. One labeled Schedules, another labeled Logs, and a third simply titled Archive. It was the archive that drew me in. The folder contained hundreds of files, most of them labeled with names and dates. At first, I thought they were simple administrative records, but when I clicked one open, I realized it was much more than that. Each file contained a detailed dossier on a past participant, psychological evaluations, personal histories, even transcripts of conversations from the retreat. I skimmed through several files, my stomach churning as a pattern emerged. The evaluations were written in a cold, clinical tone, noting participants' weaknesses, fears, and triggers. They detailed methods for breaking down resistance, isolating individuals from their support systems, and fostering dependency on Rayner and the retreat. Then I found Emma's file. Her photo stared back at me, a candid shot, her smile strained. The notes beneath it made my blood run cold. Subject exhibits high levels of anxiety and mild paranoia, susceptible to authority figures. Shows promising potential for the program. Further down, the file ended with a chilling note. Final stage complete. What the hell did that mean? My hands trembled as I copied the files onto a flash drive I'd brought. My heart pounding with each second the progress bar crept forward. The air in the library felt oppressive, as if the walls themselves were closing in on me. When the transfer was complete, I ejected the drive and erased all traces of my activity before slipping out the door. The next morning, I sought out Lila. I'd barely slept, my mind racing with what I'd uncovered. I found her sitting alone near the edge of the clearing, staring blankly at the tree line. We need to talk, I said, sitting beside her. She glanced at me, her eyes bloodshot. What's wrong? I hesitated, wondering how much I could safely share. I found something, proof that Raynor's manipulating people, targeting them. Her expression darkened. What kind of proof? I can't go into details here, I said, lowering my voice. But it's bad, Lila. Really bad. Emma, Ryan's sister, she's listed as final stage complete. I don't know what that means, but Lila's hand shot out, gripping my arm. You need to stop, she hissed. Do you have any idea what you've done? What are you talking about? She looked around nervously, then leaned in closer. Raynor knows, Evan. He knows you're not here for clarity. He's been watching you since you arrived. A cold knot formed in my stomach. How do you know that? Her gaze dropped to the ground. Because he asked me to watch you. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. What? I didn't want to, she said quickly. But he made it clear I didn't have a choice. He said it was part of my progress. To test your loyalty. My pulse raced as I processed her confession. So what? You've been spying on me this whole time. Her eyes filled with tears. At first, yes. But then I saw how serious you were about finding the truth. I know you're not like the others. That's why we need to leave. Now! Leave! I shook my head. I can't just run. I need to figure out what happened to Emma. Her voice cracked. Evan, you don't understand. If they know what you've done, you're already in danger. We both are. That night, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of the wind outside my cabin, set my nerves on edge. I replayed Lila's words in my mind, trying to untangle the truth from the fear. Around midnight, I noticed a light flickering in the woods, a faint glow coming from a direction I hadn't explored before. Grabbing my flashlight, I slipped outside, careful to avoid making any noise. The light led me to a small shed tucked among the trees. It was old and weathered, the kind of structure you'd overlook unless you were searching for it. The padlock on the door was rusted but sturdy. I circled the shed, looking for another way in. Through a crack in the wooden slats, I caught a glimpse of what was inside. Shelves lined with jars of unidentifiable substances, a table covered in tools that gleamed faintly in the dim light, and on the far wall, a row of hooks from which hung what looked like restraints. My blood turned to ice. I tested the padlock, but it held firm. I needed a tool to break it, something I didn't have. But as I stood there, the realization hit me like a gut punch. Whatever was happening in that shed wasn't part of any self-help program. It was something far darker. Footsteps crunched in the distance, and I quickly doused my flashlight, pressing myself against the shed's wall. The footsteps grew louder, then stopped. My heart pounded in my ears as I held my breath, waiting. After what felt like an eternity, they moved away, fading into the forest. I didn't wait to see who it was. I crept back to my cabin, my mind racing. Whatever was happening at this retreat, it was worse than I'd imagined, and I was running out of time to expose it. The night was suffocatingly quiet, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. I waited until the small hours when the retreat was shrouded in stillness before slipping out of my cabin. The moonlight filtered through the dense canopy, casting fractured shadows that danced with every step I took. In my hand, I clutched a crowbar I'd found behind the tool shed earlier in the day. The shed loomed ahead, half hidden among the trees. My stomach churned as I approached, the memory of what I'd glimpsed through its cracks fresh in my mind. The padlock was old but sturdy, its metal cool and unyielding in the night air. I jammed the crowbar into the gap between the lock and the door, gritting my teeth as I applied pressure. The lock resisted, groaning under the strain, until finally it snapped with a sharp crack that echoed into the woods. I froze, my pulse thundering in my ears, but the forest remained silent. No footsteps, no voices. No one had heard. With one last glance over my shoulder, I slipped inside. The air inside the shed was heavy with the stench of mildew and something sharper, like old blood. My flashlight beam swept over rows of shelves lined with jars and boxes. Each jar contained something different: feathers, fragments of hair, unidentifiable powders. The boxes were labeled with names. I pulled one off the shelf and opened it, revealing a collection of items: a bracelet a notebook, a worn photograph of a smiling young woman. Emma's name was scrawled on the label. My chest tightened as I rifled through the box. These were her things, proof that she had been here, that she hadn't simply walked away as Raynor claimed. I opened another box, and another, each one tied to a different participant. The pattern was clear: personal mementos, stripped from people who never returned. The flashlight beam caught something on the floor, a ring of faint scuff marks around a trapdoor. My heart pounded as I crouched to examine it. The edges were worn, the wood scratched as if by something, or someone desperately clawing at it. I slipped my fingers into the small metal handle and pulled. The trapdoor groaned as it opened, revealing a set of stairs leading into darkness. I hesitated for a moment, then descended, my breath shallow and my grip on the flashlight tightening with every step. The underground chamber was worse than I could have imagined. The walls were lined with soundproof padding, the kind used in interrogation rooms. A harsh fluorescent light flickered above, casting stark shadows on the floor. In the center of the room were 3 metal tables, each equipped with restraints. Tools lay scattered across a nearby workbench: pliers, scalpels, instruments that didn't belong in any therapeutic environment. My flashlight caught movement, and I turned to see a row of cells, each one barely big enough for a person to stand in. The doors were solid steel, with only a small, square window at eye level. Inside one, I saw scratch marks etched deep into the walls, evidence of frantic, desperate hands. A faint sound reached my ears, a muffled cry. I froze, scanning the room, and realized it was coming from one of the cells. The door was slightly ajar. I pushed it open and found a woman huddled in the corner, her hair matted and her eyes wide with terror. She flinched as the light fell on her face. "It's okay," I whispered, my voice trembling. "I'm here to help." She didn't respond, only whimpered as she tried to shrink further into the shadows. My heart shattered, but I knew I couldn't stay. I snapped photos of everything: the tools, the cells, the woman, and turned to leave. That's when the lights flickered on. I spun around, shielding my eyes from the sudden brightness. The sound of slow, deliberate applause filled the room. "Well, Evan," said a familiar voice, smooth and composed, "I must say, you've exceeded my expectations." Dr. Raynor stood at the top of the stairs, flanked by 3 of his staff and 2 participants I recognized from the retreat. They stared down at me with eerie calm, their expressions unreadable. "What is this?" I demanded, my voice cracking. "What the hell are you doing here?" Raynor descended the stairs, his footsteps unhurried. "This," he said, gesturing to the room, "is the truth. The clarity I offer. But you weren't ready to see it, were you?" "Ready," I spat. "You're torturing people, kidnapping them." "Torture?" He tilted his head, a hint of amusement flickering across his face. "No, Evan. Transformation. The people who come to me are broken, lost, clinging to the lies they've built their lives around. Here we strip those lies away. We rebuild them." I took a step back, my flashlight shaking in my hand. "You're insane." Raynor sighed, as if disappointed. "And you're a liar, Evan. You came here under false pretenses, pretending to seek healing when you were really here to undermine us. Did you think I wouldn't notice?" The room seemed to close in on me. "What do you want from me?" He stopped a few feet away, his eyes boring into mine. "A choice," he said. "You're talented, resourceful, and clearly capable of seeing the bigger picture. Join me, Evan. Become part of something greater. Help us shape the future. And if I say no?" Raynor smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Then you'll see firsthand what it means to confront your ego." The people behind him began to close in, their footsteps echoing off the walls. I backed toward the stairs, but the door slammed shut above me. For the first time since arriving at the retreat, I felt real fear. Raynor's voice was calm, almost gentle, as he said, "You were never meant to leave, Evan. The question is whether you'll stay willingly or as another subject." My options were dwindling, and I had no idea how to escape. But one thing was clear: Raynor wasn't running a retreat. He was running a machine designed to break people. And I was next. The air in the chamber was suffocating. Every breath felt heavy with dread, and Raynor's calm, piercing gaze never left me. My mind raced, but I kept my face as neutral as possible. Play along, I thought, just long enough to find a way out. All right, I said, my voice strained. I'll listen. Just tell me what you want. Raynor smiled, slow and satisfied. Good. Acceptance is the first step. He gestured to the others, who released their grip on my arms. I fought the urge to rub at the bruises forming there. You've already seen what we do here, he continued. Now you'll experience it for yourself. But first, there are rules. Complete obedience. Absolute trust. Are we clear? I nodded, my stomach twisting. Crystal. The days that followed were grueling. I was forced to endure the same psychological torment I'd witnessed others suffer. Confessions, isolation, and relentless interrogations designed to erode my sense of self. Through it all, I kept one goal in mind: escape. Late one night, while the others slept, I retrieved the small burner phone I'd hidden in my boot. My hands trembled as I typed out a message to Ryan's emergency contact. SOS. At path of clarity. Call police. Urgent. I sent it and quickly buried the phone back in its hiding place, praying the signal had gone through. The next day, Raynor summoned me to the lodge. You've shown great promise, Evan, he said, his tone as smooth as ever. Tonight, we'll celebrate your initiation into the fold. I forced a smile, my pulse pounding. I'm honored. As darkness fell, they led me to the ceremonial circle. The flames of a massive bonfire licked at the night sky, casting eerie shadows across the gathered crowd. Participants stood in a ring, their faces illuminated by the flickering light. I caught sight of Lila among them, her expression unreadable. Raynor stepped forward, his presence commanding. Tonight, Evan will shed his old self and embrace clarity. But before we begin, there's one final matter to address. He motioned to one of the staff, who wheeled a large monitor into the circle. The screen flickered to life, revealing Ryan. He was tied to a chair in a dimly lit room, his face bruised, his eyes wild with fear. Ryan, I shouted, stepping forward, but two men grabbed my arms, holding me back. Raynor's voice cut through the chaos, calm and measured. You've lied to us, Evan. You came here with ulterior motives, but we're willing to forgive that, if you prove your loyalty. My throat went dry. What do you want? He gestured toward the fire. Renounce your past, your identity, everything you've held on to as a barrier between yourself and clarity. Step into the flames, and you'll save him. I stared at the fire, the heat searing my skin even from a distance. And if I don't? Raynor's expression didn't change. He simply pointed at the screen, where a hooded figure appeared behind Ryan, holding a knife. I shouted, struggling against the hands that held me. Raynor stepped closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. This is your moment, Evan. Prove you understand what it means to let go, or his blood will be on your hands. The flames roared, and the world narrowed to the choice before me. My mind screamed at me to fight, to run, but I couldn't stop picturing Ryan's face, his desperate eyes locked on mine through the screen. I took a step forward. Wait, I said, my voice shaking. I'll do it. Just let him go. Raynor raised a hand, signaling to the hooded figure, who paused but didn't lower the knife. Show me your commitment first. Every instinct screamed at me to lash out, to fight my way out of this nightmare. But I knew I wouldn't get far. Instead, I clenched my fists and stepped closer to the fire, the heat scorching my face. The flames seemed alive, writhing and twisting, eager to consume. Suddenly, something snapped inside me. The fear, the despair, it all boiled over into a single, desperate act. I turned and slammed my elbow into the face of the man holding me. He stumbled back, and I lunged for Raynor. The chaos was immediate. Shouts erupted as I tackled him, the two of us crashing to the ground. I clawed at the device in his pocket, the one I guess controlled the live feed. He fought back, his strength surprising, but adrenaline gave me an edge. I grabbed the device and hurled it into the fire. Stop him, Raynor shouted, his voice losing its calm veneer for the first time. I didn't wait to see who obeyed. I shoved through the crowd, sprinting toward the woods. Behind me, I heard footsteps and shouts, but I didn't look back. Branches tore at my skin as I ran, my lungs burning with every gasp of air. When I finally slowed, the woods were eerily silent. My heart hammered in my chest as I tried to orient myself, but every direction looked the same. Then I heard it, a faint hum. Looking up, I saw the glowing lights of drones circling above, their movements slow and deliberate. Panic set in as I realized the truth. There was no escape. The retreat wasn't just isolated, it was contained. Everything I thought was wilderness was part of a controlled environment, a cage dressed up as freedom. A sharp crack behind me made me whirl around, but there was no one there, only the oppressive silence of the forest. Then my phone buzzed. I yanked it from my pocket, my hands shaking. The screen displayed a single notification, a live feed. I hesitated, then tapped it. Ryan's face filled the screen. He was still tied to the chair, his expression blank, his head lolling to one side. Blood pooled beneath him. A voice crackled through the speaker. Rayner's voice. "You failed, Evan. But don't worry. We'll help you understand." Before I could react, figures emerged from the trees, their faces obscured. Hands grabbed me, dragging me back toward the retreat. I struggled, screamed, but it was no use. The last thing I saw before the screen went dark was Ryan's lifeless body. Back at the retreat, they didn't bother pretending anymore. I was stripped of my clothes, my belongings, my identity. Rayner's calm voice echoed in my mind as they locked me in one of the soundproof cells. "Clarity isn't about healing," he'd said. "It's about control. And now you're ours." The door slammed shut, and the darkness swallowed me whole. Thanks for watching. If you like the story, click like, subscribe to the channel, and write an idea for the next story in the comments.